John. If you want to go ahead and throw that first slide up there. No? There it is. Working on Sunday. What does that trigger inside of you? Few of you are saying, man, I got to go. I don't think I want to be around here for this one. Well, there's an interesting story in John chapter 5, and we're just going to take the first 18 verses of John chapter 5 this morning. And it's a story of the unthinkable. God working on Sunday. John chapter 5. If you got your Bibles, follow along. I've got it up on the screen if you want to follow up there. It says, so after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So this is taking place in Jerusalem. And again, get the movie reel going in your head. Picture this stuff. It means more if you kind of have that movie going in your head. So there was a place in Jerusalem down by the sheep gate, and they would bring the sheep in through that gate. And there was a pool there. So now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. So you kind of get the picture, right? One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" And the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me." And Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Let's keep going. Verse 9.5. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" And now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." And the man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." And this is why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. What a fascinating story. That Jesus walks in there and heals this guy on the Sabbath. He asks him, he says, "Do you want to be healed?" And the guy doesn't even have any faith in Jesus Christ. This messes up all of the A plus B always equals C formulas that Christians come up with. And we've all got them. We tend to do this thing of, well, if I do this, I pray this certain way, I get this right, then this will always happen. This messes it all up. It messes up the formula of, if I have enough faith, I'll be healed, because this guy had no faith. His faith was literally in this legend that the angel would come down and stir the water, and the first guy in the water would be healed. And it might have actually been happening, according to history. That God may have somehow, and in His mercy, have actually been providing temporary healing for some people through an angel stirring the water. Nobody's exactly sure whether it was legend or whether it was actual fact. But that was where his faith was in. He's like, well, I'd love to be healed, but nobody ever carries me into the water when the water gets stirred, and so I'm never healed. So there he lays for 38 years. And it brings up this question because it has the picture of this multitude of invalids and sick people laying all over this place, and Jesus kind of walks in, stepping over a few sick people to one guy, doesn't even know who he is, has no faith in him, and says, hey, you want to be healed? And he heals him. It brings up a question. Why him? Why that guy? I don't know what you think of the guy. I don't even like him. I think he's kind of a turkey. I think because look at how he acted after he was healed. He didn't turn around and say, I don't know who you are, but I would follow you anywhere you want to go. He doesn't respond in faith. He responds by just kind of, okay, picks up his bed and he walks. And he kind of gets in trouble and he turns around and he turns Jesus in later. When Jesus comes to him and says, see, you're well. And I don't know, I don't understand why he said next to him what he said, but he said, see that you sin no more so that you don't get sick again. It's almost like he's kind of, I'm going to have a hard time explaining all of that because it almost looks like Jesus wasn't even sure he wanted to keep him well anymore. It's like he's saying, I don't even know if I like the guy well enough to keep him whole. And you're kind of on thin ice here, buddy. And what about the guy who's laying beside him? You ever think about him? Because if you were laying beside the guy who was healed, you know two things right away, right? You know, one, he could heal me. Two, he didn't. That's not a cool thought at all. If you're the guy laying beside the guy who got healed, it's like, that guy could heal me. And he walked out of here and he didn't do it. Did that ever bother you? You ever had something that you were praying for and you wanted so badly for God to do it? And you open up Facebook and there is that person who got the answer you were looking for and you didn't get it. You didn't get it. You got a bill that's due and you're not sure how you're going to pay it. And you open up your Facebook and somebody's like, I'm just so happy God just provided this miraculous thing for me. And it's just wonderful. Jesus is awesome and I love God and He's amazing and He does miracles for me when I pray. And you're sitting there saying, yeah, I pray too and I didn't see it happen. And that bothers me more than if he'd have never done it. And then it's annoying because that person won't be quiet about their own experience that they just had. They got a miracle from God and you didn't get it. That's the experience of the guy laying beside the guy who got healed. Why him? Why not all of them? I don't know. Doesn't say. He's God. He gets to make those choices. Does that bother you? It used to bother me like crazy. Used to drive me crazy. I'm like, God, this does not seem fair. It doesn't seem fair that you do this work over here, and sometimes He even heals people I don't like at all. And I'm not even sure that they don't deserve the healing. And they don't either. I can think of someone right now, and I'm not going to name them, thank God, that experienced a healing one time, and I was like, they're so messed up. What in the world are you doing healing them? Why don't you do half for me of what you just got done doing for them? Because I think I'm in a lot better shape spiritually than they are. Why him? Am I the only one that struggles with this kind of stuff? I hope not. That's disturbing, isn't it? I've had to come to a place of understanding that several things. One of them is that even the most amazing healings that happen here are temporary. Lazarus, for example, raised from the dead, they had a funeral for Lazarus later. He did die eventually. He's not still walking around. Everything is temporary. There is actually a promise of healing. Sometimes God gives those temporary healings here. I don't know why He chooses. I'm going to keep praying for healing. If I got a cancer diagnosis tomorrow, I would be praying for healing, and I would be asking all of you to pray for healing. And we would pray in faith, knowing that God could in an instant heal it. He could, over a period of time, heal it. It's up to Him. But at the same time, I have to know that He is still God, and I'm not in charge of Him. He doesn't answer to me. He doesn't work in a way to satisfy my sense of justice. He doesn't sit in heaven saying, how could I keep Floyd happy? How could I keep his sense of right and wrong all lined up perfectly? He doesn't try and figure that out. He doesn't try and make sense to me. And I'd rather he didn't. Because the day he does, he's not God anymore. Now I'm in charge. And I don't have infinite wisdom and I don't have infinite power, and he does. And he can do whatever he wants to do, and he can do it when he does it, when he wants to do it, and he can do it to whom he wants to do it. And it's just fine that he walks in there and walks over sick people and steps across them, heals one guy who doesn't even believe in him for some reason, and he turns around and walks back out and doesn't heal another soul in the place, and the guy turns him in later. That's fine. He can do that. He's God. So what's the possibility that the whole point of him healing that guy wasn't even so that that guy could be healed? What if he was up to something that didn't even hardly have anything to do with that guy, but he was unfolding something, a bigger story, and the guy that got healed was just a part of the story, and he got to be a part of the story. And the cool part is that he got healed in the process, at least for a little while. It brings up the next question. Why on Sunday? Which, of course, if you're really biblically astute, you're going to remind me afterwards. Now, technically the Sabbath wasn't on Sunday, it was on Saturday, and that's true. Get over it. Our Sabbath is on Sunday, so, it is what it is. But why on Sunday? Why on the Sabbath? So, this guy is carrying his bed, and the Jewish leaders come up and they're like, hey, whoa. You can't carry anything on the Sabbath. It's against the law. We have laws about these things. And the guy says, you know what? Now here would have been the proper response. Are you kidding me? I just got healed by God. You honestly think I can't carry my bed on Sunday? Let me tell you about my healing. No, he's like, yeah, well, the guy that healed me, it's really his fault because he told me to carry my bed on Sunday. It's kind of his fault. I go, where is he? I don't know. A little later, after he sees Jesus, he comes back to him. He's like, there he is, right there. That's the guy. He's the guy that broke the Sabbath, really. I mean, I was just carrying my bed, but he's really the guy that broke the Sabbath. So they kind of pigeonhole Jesus, and they're like, what are you doing? And Jesus doesn't try and say, well, it wasn't really work. He says, yep, I was working. And so is my Father in heaven, right now, on Sunday. What do you want to do about it? Fighting words. Those were fighting words. Big problem. There are 7 times, and I'll put a list on the board here, 7 times that Jesus healed people on Sunday that it was recorded. You think he's trying to make a point? You think he was trying to make a point? So you got, the one that we just looked at. You got the demoniac, Peter's mother-in-law, the man's withered hand, the blind man, crippled woman, man with the dropsy, all on Sundays. What in the world is he trying to do? Why would you go after that issue? Because it was one of the big 10 ones, right? It's one of the big 10 commandments. Keep the Sabbath day holy. So why would God in the flesh come onto earth and by appearance, at first glance, break his own laws? Now we're sitting there as humans, and they were sitting there saying, there is no way this guy could be God if he won't keep God's laws. If he won't honor the Sabbath, there's no way he could be God. Jesus clears it up for us really, really nicely. And he does it over in Mark, and it's in the context of his disciples have, they pick the grain on the Sabbath, which again, it's like, why would you do that? Why would you walk through a field picking grain for lunch on the Sabbath? That'd be like going out and picking all the vegetables in your garden to make a salad on Sunday morning. Nobody's ever done that, right? Or working to prepare a meal. Nobody's ever done that either. And Jesus does it, and they're sitting there saying, What are your guys doing? I saw them out there working, picking grain on the Sabbath so that they had something to eat. And Jesus clears it up really nicely. He says, well, here's the deal. The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of the people and not the people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. That's New Living Translation, so it's kind of an expanded version a little bit. I think the old the more literal translation is that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. He says, you're not understanding what God's heart was behind this law. He says, you don't understand that God set aside this day as a gift for you to serve your needs, to take care of you, so that you could charge into the next week regenerated and replenished. So you guys have set this thing up and you've got it flip-flopped, where you're serving the Sabbath instead of the Sabbath serving you. Here's the problem. They saw God as a God who gave out these laws, and they divorced that law from the loving heart of God. They separated what He said from who He was. And boy, do we do that. We'll take what He said and we'll separate it from who He is. And they turned what He said into this heavy yoke that hardly anybody could even bear. And Jesus comes on earth and He says, I have to correct this. Because people view God wrongly because of what's going on in the Sabbath. So imagine you're a little boy and you grow up and Saturday, Friday for them, is a fun day. And you get to do stuff, you fish or you do whatever, but you know in the back of your head, the fun's going to end here in a few hours because the Sabbath is coming. And for them, it started the evening before. So you dreaded the Sabbath every week. And you grow up dreading the Sabbath every week. And you become an adult who dreads the Sabbath every week. And then you become the adult who enforces the Sabbath every week on a bunch of other little boys who dread the Sabbath every week. And all of a sudden, that day becomes a weekly reminder of how mean God is and how harsh He is. And every week you get another reminder of how mean of a God you serve. He's just there to take away my fun once a week for 24 hours. I can't do anything fun. I sit through a boring church service. Preacher goes on, and we go home. I can't do anything. Can't do anything fun. Man, I can't wait till Sunday's over. And if whatever you're doing on Sunday ends with, man, I'm glad this is over, then you're probably missing a gift that God intended for you to have. He's not angry at you. He's not saying, you violated that Sabbath. And even in the Old Testament, when they had disregarded the Sabbath and he brought some calamity onto them because they had disregarded the Sabbath, He did so out of a heart of love and relationship because He wanted them to experience the best that He had for them. You know, the stuff that we think God says that's supposed to take away our fun, Things like, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't commit fornication, all that stuff. And temporarily, when you think, that takes some saying no to myself, and I don't like saying no to myself. It is always for our long-term benefit. Every one of those things is out of a heart of love. And if you separate what he says from who he is, you'll miss why he said it. It comes out of a heart of absolute love for his children. And the reason he says what he says is because he's invested and he's interested in our long-term benefit. You can disregard it. It's up to you. But it's not going to work out. So, what am I supposed to do with this thing? I mean, we're talking about Sunday here, and so, what do I do? Well, very practically. Do you take the gift or do you reject it? It's up to you. Do you receive a day every 7 days, and it doesn't have to be on Sunday, where you just kind of recharge and regenerate? Does worship recharge you, or does it drain you? Because if it drains you, then something's wrong. And if you walk out of here this morning and you're like, glad I suffered through that and I made it, then something's not right. Either something's not right in what we're doing, or something's not right in your heart, or something's wrong. Something went wrong. Because if you can't walk out of here saying, I needed that. Yeah, I needed that this morning. And kind of re-energize and go into your week next week with some fresh energy, then you're missing something that God intended for you to have and to give it to you. And I have, as I've understood that the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath, it's changed everything in the way that I look forward to Sundays. It's become one of my favorite days. I don't apologize for not getting stuff done on Sunday. Sometimes I do stuff. Sometimes I don't. I don't care. I have about 2 goals, and that is to worship God and connect, and to rest. That's it. Sometimes that looks like fishing. Sometimes it looks like watching football. Whatever. That's the point. Today, that's the point of the day. Is it something that we ought to, set some careful rules around to make sure everybody gets it? You can't. That was the point of what Jesus was saying. He says, when you guys do that, it warps your view of God. It twists who God is in your head. And that was his whole point in coming, was to correct a terrible theology that had developed over the years. When God initially gave those commands, he was doing it out of relationship with a people that he had set aside and were very, very precious to him. And at least that first generation, I think, understood we are special, special people. We have a God who is looking out for us, and he's trying to take care of us. This is amazing. And as the generations went, it didn't take long till they saw God not as a God who was taking care of them, and not as a God who was protecting them, but as a God who was demanding so much of them. And it got worse and worse and worse. And if you separate, if you cannot see a God who loves you dearly, there are not enough laws that you can make to make you follow God. You can't create enough laws to make somebody righteous. And the fear of consequences will not even keep people from breaking the law. Hang out in prison. You think those guys didn't know that would happen if they broke laws? Sure. They know it's not going to end well. If they just stop and think it through a little bit, they know. They know if I get caught, it's not going to end well. The problem is that is not a strong enough power to keep people from breaking a law. Love actually does. Love actually changes something from the inside out. The reason that civically we have to have laws and people enforce them, thank you, Mr. Stutzman, is because people don't understand God's love and because we don't naturally function in a love of what is right. And we live in a culture of people who do not naturally function in a love of what is right because they don't understand the heart of God. So as you open up, especially the Gospels, you see the stories, you read the stories, you have to understand this is God making our theology right. Whatever you see Him doing says a lot about who God is. And we're going to delve some more into that next week as we kind of wrap this story up where these guys come after Him and they're saying, how in the world do you think that you have the right to tell a guy that he can work? And not only that, but when we approach you, you say, yep, I'm working. And yes, it is the Sabbath. And you know what else? So is my Father. So is God. He's working too. And they challenge that, and we're going to delve into that next week. How in the world He could say and do what He did. But if you don't leave with anything else this morning, leave with this. And Anthony and Shane, why don't you go ahead and come on up? Just leave with this. And that is that you serve a God who loves you incredibly. And the things that He asks you to go through, the things He asks you to do, all come out of a heart of love. You can, and people have, turn that into then nothing is sin. That's not what you do with it. Sin's still sin. But you have to see that it comes from, when He says don't do that, He says it because He loves us. Because He cares deeply about us. And know that. And then enjoy your Sunday. Go into tomorrow, recharge, and enjoy it. Let's stand and pray.